Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness, and Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Today, me and Donovan are going to be talking about therapy and our experiences with it, the pros and cons, just about therapy today.
Yep.
So what is your experience with therapy or your thoughts about it, Donovan?
Yeah, so it's kind of a long history, but I have actually never been into a therapist's office, actually. I considered it pretty strongly, several years ago when I was going through a particularly rough breakup before I knew any of these tactics. But the problem at that point was that I kind of was a little bit feeling like it wouldn't help. It was a weird position because I had studied psychology and I felt like I should have had the tools to be able to work through some of my problems myself, which is extra interesting because through that curriculum, it was brought up multiple times how important or how useful therapy can be. But still, I wasn't in a position where I felt like I wanted to do it. I think I went to one kind of like an intake or like kind of a get to know you type of thing for a therapist.
Yeah.
But then I ended up talking myself out of it, which is crazy because that's exactly what I needed at that moment. But yeah, so in the years since, I have still never formally gone to therapy. I have used an online, text-based version as just kind of experimenting to see what different tools were. But I really feel like that's part of my experience, part of my tool set that I really haven't explored as fully as I could have.
I have heard this story from a lot of people, like that hesitation to go to therapy. And I think that really brings a really good point. I completely understand like wanting to figure it out on your own. And given that you've studied psychology, that you should be able to figure it out on your own. But I hear this from a lot of people, that hesitation, or do you feel like there was some sort of taboo or stigma of going to therapy might influence your perspective of yourself or other people's perspective of yourself? Is that what kind of hindered you?
Yeah, definitely that was a part of it. Not so much the social part because I've never, or at least the past 10 years or so, not really cared about that very much.
Yeah.
But at a personal level, there was some part of me, some messaging, signaling system saying, you should be able to figure this out. You studied this stuff. You should be able to do it on your own. You already know everything they're going to tell you, which now, looking back, is just a really bad mindset. Like, it's so useful to have an outside perspective, especially from someone who's been specifically trained or practices every day in helping navigate through problems. So when I was conceptualizing about it, I kind of thought of like, oh, you'll go in and you'll get this person who tells you these psych tricks, right? These different tactics or whatever that you can use.
Right.
And I felt like I was already familiar with that. But it wasn't until later when I did some coaching stuff, like I had a coach at one of the jobs that I had recently. And it wasn't until then that I realized how really useful it is when someone with training can kind of guide you through the process, even if you already know some of the tactics and some of the ideas. It's so easy to get caught up in my own mind. I'll just speak from my own experience, but it's so easy to get caught up in my own thinking and my own, oh, I'm going to do this tactic, I'm going to do this tactic. And just having someone else outside to break down some of those paths that I started going on opens up a huge amount of possibilities and insights that I wouldn't get otherwise. So even if there is no new information, even if there is no new, which I was wrong, there was, but even if there was nothing new
right.
that I didn't know, just having someone else to bounce ideas off of that's been trained in a way to receive and reflect that usefully, right? Because if we ask just a random person for advice, they may or may not be calibrated on ways to do that effectively. Whereas in therapy or coaching or any of these occupations that people are practicing and training to do this, the quality of guidance and the quality of just collaboration is so much higher.
Oh, absolutely. And, when you're trying to analyze or psychoanalyze yourself, you can't really see everything. You have a limited perspective and you know a lot, but there's this whole other world that you don't know. And I have discovered that too for myself, that I know a lot. I studied psychology too for my undergrad, but there's a whole nother world that is unknown, that it wouldn't even occur to me to have like a certain thought, because it just wasn't based in my past experiences. And actually what you pointed out of like, I felt like I should know these things, so therefore therapy was unnecessary. But the thing is like, knowing things doesn't actually make a difference. Like, people know how to lose weight, but that doesn't necessarily make the difference for them of like eating healthier and exercising and the basic things that they know. And I've learned over the years that knowing things actually is very limiting for yourself, because then you're just being like, oh, I know this. So it closes you off to being open to what else is out there. And then you're really not growing and developing yourself. And that's what I've learned, to just be, I know a lot of stuff, but there's just a vast world of unknown. And, maybe a therapist might be telling me the tools that I already know, but it's just, have I actually applied it to my life and looked in my own life, in my own past, and how it's influencing me now? That's a whole different ballgame, really.
Yeah, that's one of the big things that I uncovered too, is there's a huge gap between knowing and doing.
Yes.
And just having scheduled time to go through and think about, in the case of therapy, kind of your life or whatever things you're trying to work through, having dedicated time to do that and walk through the steps is extremely important, as opposed to just knowing, oh, I know what these steps are.
Right.
If you don't do them, then that doesn't matter. It's not going to lead to the improvement. Like you were saying with exercise, same kind of thing. I know how to eat fruits and vegetables. If I don't actually plan to do it, then it doesn't help.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. So
So on that note, I think that kind of gives a baseline of my experience, but I'd be curious to know what sort of experience you've had with therapy.
My first experience with a therapy or counseling really was with my college counselor, my school counselor. And it was kind of for an acute situation where I was dealing with a major breakup, the first love of my life, and then finding out that he actually lied and cheated on me. It was very traumatizing for me. So I went to therapy just to like deal with that, because it was very like a big deal for me, and it helped. I only went to like a few sessions though, and I was like, okay, I feel like I'm steady enough to go back out there and move on with my life. And so how was that? And then maybe a year or two later, I was in another relationship, a good relationship that lasted about a year. And then we had to break up because he was moving to Japan. So for some fellowship for a year. So we decided to break up for that reason. And so that was also hard for me. So I went to my school counselor again to deal with that. And again, an acute situation. And it wasn't until I was in my medical program where I was actually dealing with a lot of family drama, I guess, where a lot of family issues was going on. And I realized that, and I started seeing my school counselor at that point, and it started to occur to me that, wow, maybe there's certain patterns that I have that I know, but they're not like breaking free of them. The type of man that I date, they all seem to be emotionally unavailable to some point, and why am I having challenges with that? And really delving into the past of my relationship with my parents and how that influenced everything, and realizing that, maybe there's more to explore that I haven't even thought of. And it really, and I ended up working with that counselor for a year or two, I think, and it just really, really benefited me in a lot of different ways. And it just kind of opened my mind to like all these other tools that could be beneficial for me, like a meditation retreat and personal development courses and books, all sorts of things. And I remember my therapist giving me an example of a scenario of like this mother and daughter, and they get in a conflict, and what would you say or do to resolve that conflict? And I said one thing that I thought was a really good answer. And then she was like saying another example of another answer. And then I was like, mind blown at how amazing of an answer her answer seemed to be. And I was like, that never even occurred to me. So I don't even remember what the situation was, but I remember her answer being like, wow, that's pretty profound. And that is really amazing. Although after a while, and then even after I finished med school, I continued work as a therapist. But I feel like at a certain point after a few years, I discovered a lot about myself in my past, but I felt like I plateaued with my progress. I was making huge progress in the beginning after a first year or two, but then I felt like I plateaued. And that's kind of where I needed to explore other maybe modalities, because, and this is what I say to a lot of my patients, that, you know, I think in traditional talk therapy, not everyone, you know, there's all sorts of different practitioners out there, and, you know, you can always continue to make progress regardless with who you work with. But for myself, I felt like I made huge progress, and then I plateaued. And I think for me, it was just that you can intellectually understand why you do certain things, but it doesn't necessarily stop the behavior or the action or the thought that continues. Like, I know I am dating these types of guys because of my relationship, but that's not necessarily stopping what was going on. And so I explored other modalities of more I don't want to say off brand, or just like different types of modalities. I tried like hypnotherapy, which I actually practiced myself. And the thing that really helped was EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And that actually kind of has you go back into your past, and kind of like, I can't even really explain it that well, but it kind of like does these motions back and forth. She had me hold these things that buzz back and forth, and like that kind of causes your eye movement to, and I don't know. Yeah, I'm butchering the explanation. My therapist will explain it better, because I don't do it myself. But it has made a huge difference, and it kind of had me go back into my past and really kind of relive, not even like traumatic experiences, but I remember from that, I had one moment from when I was 8 or so. She had me think of moments where I felt like a disappointment or not good enough or all those things. And that came up for me was this time when I was 8, and my dad wanted me to take this Chinese water painting class, and I didn't want to take it. But when I told my dad, I don't remember what he said, I felt like such a disappointment of a daughter, and that I was like good enough. And that was just, you know, one of many incidences of that happening. And it kind of helped me free from that. And after that incident, I was actually able to get into a long-term healthy relationship of almost 4 years. And that really made a difference. But then I continued on my self-exploration work with other tools like landmark or personal development courses, and that blew up. Like, there was a whole nother world that I discovered in that, and we can make that a whole different episode. It's like, I could talk about that for hours. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like the main benefits that you got out of it, if I'm to summarize kind of what you said, is that you got some dedicated time. So basically, therapy was a resource for you, or counseling.
Yeah.
That came up a couple times in like, I will say more dire situations. I don't know if that's really the right word.
Right.
That might be a little too dramatic, but
like,
more emotionally taxing situations.
Yes.
And then you saw pretty quickly that it helped you through these situations. Then when you stuck with it longer term, you kind of got up to a point where you were ready to seek out other tactics, other different ways of exploring. But the first couple pieces laid like a foundation for kind of that further exploration. It sounded like to me, when you said that you plateaued, that you had reached a point where you had kind of resolved whatever you went in for originally, or at least largely made, like you said, progress.
Yeah.
So it seems like therapy is a really good tool. And I actually have a question for you, but it seems like it's a really good tool to like really knock out super specific things, especially if they're causing a lot of problems for you.
Yeah.
And then you can open up and kind of explore some of the other stuff. But I did have a question in terms of, do you think that that plateau would have been broken by switching providers, like having someone to start fresh and kind of talk about different things with? Or do you think that it was a factor of the kind of style itself?
Yeah, I think it could have been a combination of both. And I did switch providers to work with someone who had a different type of modality. And I don't know if she did like the cognitive behavioral therapy or just traditional talk therapy, I would have made like further progress just because she was different. But I was like specific seeking out like a different type of approach versus because I had already at that point done years of just traditional, cognitive behavioral therapy.
I was just going to say that there's probably most providers probably have some sort of specialty, right? Or some sort of specific cases that they tend to work extra well with. Right. So it probably makes sense that once you've resolved or made progress on or feel like you've got control over some specific set of problems,
right,
that you would move into other modalities, as you've been calling them.
Yeah, and it's really just kind of uncovering more, like peeling back the layers of the onion with yourself. It's not necessarily adding more to things that because I've studied psychology. I've done a lot of different things. I know a lot of things. And I was just realizing, they uncovered a lot in traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, but there were others that seemed to like go deeper and really uncover that emotional, like intellectually I understand why I'm doing a certain thing, but like on an emotional level, that little like 5-year-old girl does not understand that. So it's just like, how do you help that little girl that, because I can't go back to being 5, but there are methods and ways to help that little girl that was hurt so long ago heal in that sense, with like EMDR or hypnotherapy. And I'm sure there's like a ton of other tools too. But I think it's really in the path of self-discovery or self-awareness. When you're just first starting out, just talk therapy could be huge. You can make huge progress with that. And I think the further you get into it, you just begin to realize, I don't know anything at all. And it's just like give up everything that and really be open to, what you can discover more about yourself. And there's endless amounts of what you could discover about yourself. And I don't know if realizes that. They're like, oh, well, I know myself. Well, yeah, you do, but there's just stuff you don't know about why you do certain things, what stops you in life, why you can't just like that person that broke your heart like a decade ago, why you can't get over that. Those kinds of things. I encounter people like that all the time, and they're like, oh, yeah, so.
Yeah, I always think about it in terms of like, I don't know, a garden or your front yard or something, right? You walk by certain physical places enough that you're like, yeah, I know this place really well. Yeah. But you can always go layers and layers deeper in terms of, do you know exactly how many plants are growing here? Do you know how many petals are growing off of each plant? Like, right. And maybe that level of specificity sounds a little bit strange, but when it comes to understanding ourselves, we can kind of just keep going deeper into the nuances. And sometimes, like knowing exactly how many petals are on every flower in your garden, probably a little bit too much. Like you can go too far down where it's not useful anymore. But a lot of times there's tons and tons of useful information underneath some of those layers, even for something that we feel like, oh, I'm familiar with me because I am me. Right. But if you don't spend time actually exploring and trying to understand yourself, then it's not going to happen just by default. But I do think that's a very common feeling is, oh, I know me perfectly well because I am me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really, really good analogy. And yeah, there's just a lot of, even if you had the best childhood in the world, which, a lot of people do, and a lot of people don't, even that child with the perfect parents has these childhood wounds and traumas that impact and influence how they act and behave and think in their day-to-day. And I don't want people to dwell in the past and get caught in that like, oh, it was so sad, it was boo-hoo me, I'm a victim, but to realize, that influences you, and you don't have to let your past influence who you are today. And freeing yourself from your past is important, but also looking forward. What are the actions that would get me to whatever it is that you want for yourself, whether it's confidence or the self-love or just procrastinating less or eating healthier? I don't know what it is, but there's always room to explore.
Yeah, going off of what you just said about going into the past, I do think it's the way that I try to look at it is always that there are very useful pieces of information in the past to use in future decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But I always think it's a little weird, or I have a hard time wrapping my mind around it when people do this like shoulda, coulda, woulda thing, right? Like, what if you had went to Harvard? I don't know. What if? I don't know what this question is. Like, and I feel like a lot of people spend a lot of time in, what if I had made a different decision? Which that type of exploration of the past is not very useful at all.
No.
It just keeps you sitting in like,
right.
So I think that's the distinction, at least for me, is if you're exploring the past to find things to use now, or if you're exploring the past to just feel bad about things.
There's a difference. Yeah. Or like to dwell on if my dad just loved me more or went to my ball games. That would have just like, I guess it's also forgiving the past, or just not holding on to those resentments or those angers or grudges or whatever it is from your past. Yeah, I mean, whatever that person did, could have been absolutely hurtful. That's valid. But it's like if you hold on to that anger or that resentment into your future, that's really just hurting yourself. That, that saying of when you hold on to anger or resentment, that's like drinking poison for yourself, even though you mean it intended for the other person. It's really, giving yourself distress and upset. And it's like, you gotta choose whether you want to hold on to that or not. Yeah, you could be right, or you can, be free and happy. Your choice. Choose.
Yeah, and a lot of people, it seems like quite a few people carry stuff with them for a very, very long time, but it doesn't produce anything of use. I mean, I guess for some people it kind of influences the way they make future decisions to some degree, but there's also a lot of just revisiting of things that, while they may be painful or they may be uncomfortable, revisiting them and just feeling bad about it doesn't do, like, it's not necessary, and it doesn't help you in the future. So easier said than done, obviously, and there are tools that we will not talk about probably for right now for working through some of that stuff. But the high level thing is there's just no real purpose behind living in the past. I did have a question for you around, you kind of asked me how I felt in terms of stigma or social pressure. How did you feel in those terms when you went to therapy? I guess at different times, because it's different times of your life too.
Different stages of my life through undergrad and then in medical school. For me, I guess I wasn't like adverse to doing it, but I didn't really see benefit before, the backups and all of that. Before, it was just not like a bad thing to do. I wouldn't judge someone if they went to therapy. I was like, cool. It was just like kind of more of an indifference. But then it was having that experience of going in it and having the benefits and realizing things about myself that I didn't know. Now I'm just a huge advocate. I think like everyone should go to therapy is my perspective, because you learn a lot of things in school, but you don't necessarily learn how to handle like your emotions and learn how to deal with your past baggage. And then there's just like a bunch of people walking around not knowing how to deal with that, so they're getting in fights with their spouses or just angry with people all the time, and it's just, or they can never have a successful relationship. That's why they have 5 divorces. It's just like, maybe consider trying therapy, because maybe the problem is you. If you're having 5 divorces, maybe there's room to grow and explore what's the deal, and it's not all your spouse's fault or ex-spouse's fault. Just consider.
I do think there's huge benefit too in getting access to these tools earlier. So in high school, being able to see the effects of going to therapy, as well as getting some of the more practical, useful tools for, it sounded like reframing, and I don't know what else you use, but
Oh,
I feel
absolutely.
like having exposure to that early makes such a big difference, because it seems like to me, the later that someone is in life, not always,
Yeah.
but a lot of times people are so ingrained with these patterns of thinking or habits or ways that they've solved problems in the past. Like you were saying, the way to solve this problem is to just stop being married. Like, I've already done this several times.
Right.
It's not that hard.
Yeah.
But I feel like people get into kind of these, they see solutions and paths that have worked for them in the past, but may have had some
Right.
sort of fallout, some suboptimal outcomes.
Right.
And I do think it's interesting that the earlier you get a hold of some of this stuff, the more likely it is to lead to compounding those tools and tactics.
Absolutely. And for me personally, my parents coming from a Chinese heritage, even though I was born in California, my parents super great at teaching me to work hard, which I like kick butt at, but learning how to deal with emotions was not their strong suit. So it's just like I had to figure it out all on my own with all the therapy and discovery work that I did. And I'm hugely grateful for everything that they did for me, and priceless tools, but I can't blame them for not having those tools themselves. And that was something I pursued myself because I realized, yeah, there's a lot there. But there's plenty of people who have emotionally, or parents that kind of like know how to deal with emotions in a healthier way, I guess, rather than just be like, don't do that, like kind of a thing. So
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for everyone. I don't know what everyone's experience is, but it seems to me like it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of a very, very small percent of people were taught by their parents lots of really strong, really great tools for handling their emotions and dealing with stuff.
yeah.
And then everyone else has been passed down some hodgepodge of like, some of these things kind of work. This is the only way that I know how to do this.
Right.
This is, I know this is bad, but I don't know how else to solve or manage this. And it
Right.
seems like most people end up with some just mix of skills
Yeah.
for managing emotions and handling them
Mhm.
that really leaves people weak for the most part in a couple areas or a couple types of situations. And then of course, I think there's another, you know, chunk of people who really get no tools for managing any emotions whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I just feel like, how can you expect people to teach tools that they themselves don't have? How am I going to teach my
Right.
kids to do something I don't know about?
Right.
But I do think it shows in terms of how, or like the kinds of problems that people run into.
Mhm.
Because I know for me, in my household, there was not many useful communication tools.
Yeah.
There was very good baseline at communicating like care,
Yeah.
which is awesome. I'm very grateful for that. Outside of that baseline though, there was just so many tactics that I'm not on board with anymore.
Hmm.
And so many things that I just feel like if people just knew the difference in the ways that they can approach certain problems
Hmm.
and how much better outcomes it could lead to,
Right.
they'd be so much more on board with going to things like therapy.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
part of it is knowing that it works, right? Because a lot of people go to therapy and it doesn't
Mhm.
quite give them the results they're looking for,
Mhm.
or they hear that without even going.
Right.
But if you actually go and you actually know what you're trying to tackle, or you find someone who can help you figure it out, you can unlock some of these tools that probably were not passed down from your upbringing.
Right. And you don't even know that they exist or how. It's really not necessarily, I want to remove that stigma like it's for broken or people that
Mm-hmm.
need fixing. And no, it's not. It's just a tool to help you be more effective in your life, in your relationships, and the people that you interact with. And it absolutely helped me in a lot of ways in helping me with relationships, communication. And what you said about coaching is kind of like falls in alignment with that, of just having some outside perspective and offering you like maybe a better, more effective way to handle a situation. like a conflict or emotional whatever, it makes a difference. And it's like, yeah, you could try to figure it on your own. If you try to like learn swimming from a book, it's like not going to be that effective. You need a coach. Oh, you're making this stroke this way. Maybe try doing it this way. Might get you there faster. Yeah, there's no wrong or right way. People do it at their own pace or whatever. But it's like, do you want to accelerate your progress? Yeah, maybe you could figure it out on your own in like 5 years, 10 years, perhaps if you read enough books. But, you know, if you work with a therapist, maybe it's like 1 year, who knows? Or maybe it's a few sessions, who knows? There could be a whole nother world of effectiveness in life that you are just completely oblivious to, and you just want to do it your way. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's very much in line with the way that I've been thinking the last year or two in terms of different tools, which to me, it's a matter of how much investment you want to put into a particular tool and how quickly you're trying to resolve some particular thing. Yeah. So like you were saying, I think therapy can be useful for just about anyone because it will go through kind of your thought process and whatnot. But I think the strength of the tool kind of dictates your results. So like reading is a very weak tool. That's not to say you shouldn't read. It's just that it's very passive, right? It doesn't have much time commitment forced. It doesn't have much emotional commitment forced. It doesn't have much investment in terms of cost compared to other things. Therapy, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite, right? Where you go in with heavier investments. So the more you're investing in these tools, assuming that they're useful tools, the bigger and faster the results are as well. So to me, it's always a matter of thinking like, what problems are you trying to solve? How big are they? And how fast do you want to get them done? And then that will help you kind of choose which pathway to take. So for me, for example, I did it the slow way. I did it the 5 years, figure out, read books, do everything on my own type of way.
Yeah.
But you're right. If I had gone into therapy and gotten the same tools that it took me years to read out of books and apply, I would have got those same issues, those same insecurities knocked out in no time, as well as the things that aren't, like you were saying, like broken or wrong type of things, just better communication in general. Things like that I would have picked up so much faster. So I think it's really, I don't know, it's useful for me at least to frame it in terms of how powerful of a tool do I need for the thing that I want, and how fast do I want to be able to do it, and how much am I willing to invest in X, Y, or Z.
Right, exactly. And you know, it made me think of like, you know, when you're first learning something, you can understand it, but are you like a master after reading it 1 or 2 times around? Just like having more highly trained people to help you through that process can make a difference in yourself. I know, like for me, as far as like my communication and listening skills has vastly improved over the years with all the tools that I've been working on and implementing in the courses and the therapy and all of that, vastly. But then I like experience these even more effective leaders and coaches and all sorts of people that are like way better than me. And I'm like, wow, there's still a lot of room for me to grow. Like, yeah, I was here and I'm here, but there's like people up there, and that's just a whole different, clearly I could keep going if I want to. Yeah.
Well, I think that for the most part is all the questions that I have, or all the stuff that I wanted to cover.
Well, thanks everyone for watching.
Thanks.
All right, we'll see you next time.